Cathy Madavan, welcome to Making Disciples.
Chris Rogers, thank you.
Can I admit something to you? A couple of years ago, you preached at Spring Harvest and you used a cracking illustration of the resurrection man. And you likened those programs where people take an old building and they go and resurrect them. And you talked about Jesus being the resurrection man. And I thought it was a really good illustration. I stole it and I've used it all over the place as my own.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
there's a confession.
It's the Restoration Man. It's George Clark. It's his
That's
TV
it, Restoration Man.
series.
Well,
He is awesome. You've adapted it. That's
yeah,
good.
I've made it more biblical. Let's
Yeah, which is excellent.
Can I start by asking you a quick question? Who was it that first discipled you?
That's an excellent question. So I think actually, and this is a bit of a contentious theological point maybe, but I had a couple of people who were kind of showing me how to follow Jesus before I was even a follower myself.
Yeah.
You know, there were people who were kind of while I was at university, people who were in the Christian Union there who were following Jesus and asking me to follow alongside them. And so although I didn't really know kind of who Jesus was for myself, I was kind of captivated by what they were saying and this person that we're talking about. And so I was taking this direction towards Jesus alongside them. Like, you know, you kind of imagine back in the day with Jesus, people are hanging on in the crowd, kind of like following Jesus, but not really sure what they're following. And then after I, made a decision to, follow Jesus for myself, I would say that the church that I was part of in Plymouth, Mutley Baptist, and the minister Ian Coffey there, and the student group, and small groups, friends there who had challenged me, made me face up to the fact that maybe I wasn't living in a way that Jesus would particularly be thrilled about, and helping me to understand the word and how to pray. People who just said, watch me, watch how I do it, spend time with me. And that's been life-changing, really, those people.
Yeah. I guess what we often do in the church is we think discipleship happens after conversion, and before conversion, it's called evangelism. Whereas actually Jesus says, therefore go and make disciples. It's making disciples that's the thing. And yes, we can lead people to discipleship well before, we behave as if there's a line that we have to somehow cross.
Well, yes, I always ask the question, whether you're a Christian or not, really, are you walking towards Jesus or away from him? Because you can find someone who said a prayer, but actually is walking away from Jesus. And then you can find someone who yet doesn't know Jesus fully, but is really interested in this incredible man and what he said and he did and the claims that he's made, and is kind of captivated by him and is walking towards him. And I just feel like I've been called to a life of walking towards Jesus, to follow him and to help other people to face the right direction, I suppose.
Hey, one of the things I love about you, Cathy, is that you're really good at taking deep theological concepts and you make them so grounded and normal that you have no idea that you're talking about something really deep. And you've written a book recently that I absolutely love, and it's called Living on Purpose.
Nice.
And I love this. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I love it. One is it's nice and short. It's not very long. And I like short books. It's mega practical. It's broken down into days. But can I talk about this title first? Living on Purpose.
Yeah.
Because that's a great discipleship phrase. And I guess you could describe particularly one aspect of discipleship as living on purpose. Living a life that has some kind of direction to it. Where did you get the title from? What was the inspiration behind the title?
Well, I suppose, again, it is about intentionally following, and I always laugh because we've got two teenagers, and when they go out at night, I will often say to them, and it's become a bit of a fun thing in our house, that we always shout out to them, make wise choices before they leave the house. And actually now they're old enough and my husband and I can go out, they shout out to us before we leave, make wise choices. And I kind of feel like the book of James, which is what my book is based on, is basically James saying to the church, make wise choices. Don't just live accidentally, do it intentionally, make decisions that will play out. Everything we do has a consequence. So make decisions that will be about wise choices. And you'll know, Chris, as a church leader, and we have been in church ministry for a couple of decades, that what is the most heartbreaking thing of all is seeing people who kind of know the truth. They've got the Bible on their phones, they've got 5 versions of the Bible on their shelves, but actually when faced with temptation or their own opinions or rights or desires or, different choices. They fail to make wise choices. And sometimes that's because we're human and we fall, but sometimes it's because we just haven't engaged with the word of God and what he's saying. And I love the book of James because, frankly, he just lays it out like practical stuff on every area of our life and says, here we go, here's some help to make wise choices and to live more purposefully rather than just reacting or living accidentally depending on what happens to us. It's actually making an internal decision to follow rather than just reacting, I suppose.
Yeah, because there's danger that we go through life like tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, wherever you get blown. And I often say to my guys in church, I've got a church with loads of millennials in it, and I know that they're only at our church because the wind's blown them to us. It's not because they've intentionally chosen to live in East London. And I'm often saying to them, look, live in a life that's intentional, that the direction you're going is because you've chosen this is the direction to go, rather than it's just incidental and I'm making do with wherever I'm at. Can we just push into that a little bit? Because I think...
Do it.
I think particularly for those who are young, who are looking at the rest of their life, there's an unknownness and maybe don't know how to be intentional. And then there are those at the other end who maybe have got to the end of their life and thought, do you know what, I've not been intentional throughout my life. How do you become intentional? And what's that look like? Do you just wake up one day and say, this is where I'm going, or is there a process?
Well, I think for me, it's about thinking about what wisdom is. And I think you can live life according to what happens to you, or you can say, what does wisdom look like? And I don't actually believe that older people are necessarily the wise ones, actually, and that young people are the impulsive ones. I think increasingly in our society, there's baby boomers who are just as impulsive as any millennial, let's be honest. And I love the fact that, for Greeks, the wisdom was about knowledge, it was about understanding, it was all of that stuff. But for the Jewish people, wisdom was a real practical discernment about how you sort of live out your life, what to do when you don't know what to do. And I think being intentional is about self-reflection. It's about saying, actually, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to pause on some of these issues. I am, as the book of James says, going to maybe, tame my tongue for a moment, think about the consequences of what I say, think about the consequences of what I'm feeling and what those are being motivated by. If we're feeling judgmental or sensing favoritism, or if we're facing challenges and trials or persecution, actually reflect a little bit rather than immediately jumping onto what our instincts are, and actually surrendering ourselves. And the book of James is really about a book of surrender, where we go, our allegiance isn't to ourselves, it's to Jesus, and he's the King of Kings. So if I'm going to put him on the throne, I have to take me off a little bit or a lot of it. And I have to work out how to intentionally do that. And that takes reflection. That's not instinctive, I don't think.
Can I ask a bit more about this? Because I loved it. I love the topics that you chose in it. And as you said, the book of James is a book on discipleship. And it is. I love the way it ends by this whole piece about surrender. And what you surrender your heart to will essentially lead you. How did you choose? What was the process for you of choosing these topics? Did you just flick through James and think, right, I've got 30 days, let me just see what's in there? Was there a process of trying to work out what were the topics? Because you talk about, I listed a few here, you talk about faith and action, you talk about taming the tongue, you talk about evangelism, you talk about commitment and control. How did you choose these?
Well, James chose them for me, which was incredibly handy, and I kind of felt like I didn't want this book just to be like a tiny little daily reading, but I also didn't want it to be a commentary. I wanted it to be something that kind of gave other people that, what I needed, which is sort of some lightheartedness, but also some analysis of what the verses were doing. Yeah. But then I also just chose these different areas. I think I called them abiding, serving, loving, and growing on purpose. How do we abide on purpose? How do we stay kind of rooted into God? How do we love people on purpose, even when they're hard to love? How do we serve when our whole society says just observe? It's all about you. Don't step up. Step back and critique. And how do you deliberately choose to grow? How do you nourish yourself in your way to grow? So I've written these sort of longer articles through it as well to kind of embed some of these discipleship issues, like a bit out of the book of James, just some more reflection on it, because I'm just really passionate about us continuing to grow in faith. Discipleship doesn't stop 6 weeks after you become a Christian, you've been baptized or whatever. It is about taking these things, and some of them will be more relevant to you today than others, and that's I think typical in a book. James is very full of like little wisdom proverbs almost, and some of them will be more relevant to you today, and some of them will be more relevant another day. But hopefully, it gives you tools in your toolkit to keep growing, and they're very small, bite-sized chunks, which I think is helpful.
And that's what I liked about it. I think it's a book for beginners, in that new Christians will read this because it's nice and short and pithy. We'll give them some great areas to think about, surrendering the whole of our lives. And actually, you've nailed some really good, the disciples talk about following, copying, mimicking and growing. And actually, your titles kind of mimic some of the language that the rabbis would have had around discipleship. So I think it's a good kind of basic beginner's book. But
that's great.
I think it's also, I've been, a Christian now, 18, 19, maybe, I don't know, something like that. Years. And
a while.
20 something. Anyway, my maths is really bad. And I think this is a great book for what I would describe as those of us that are stagnant Christians. We did a lot of growing when we became disciples, but over the recent years, we may have just slowed down that sense of growing. And I think what this does is it just reignites that thought of, these are areas of my life that I do want to come back to, because our lives are like gardens. They grow weeds, and sometimes we have to go and do a bit of pruning and pulling up, don't we?
I think you're right, because James is a bit of a shot in the arm. He's pretty brutal. I mean, he is very, very direct.
Yeah.
But actually, what I love about it is, there is some external stuff about how you tame your tongue and, like action things. But also what he really digs into is your desires and your motives and why you do the things you do. And I don't know about you, but I feel like, as disciples, we go around in circles on some of these issues, and we just go deeper each time.
Yeah.
And, and there is the external stuff to kind of, to make sure that we're getting right. But actually, it's what motivates that. And I don't think God ever stops challenging us on that stuff. He just takes us a layer deeper each time. So it's challenged me. So hopefully it will challenge lots of people as well.
Yeah. Hey, in the book, you talk about commitment, and I've heard you talk about commitment before. And I think one of the things that many of our churches struggle with is when we see people who've made a commitment, not to Jesus, but to other things like marriage or commitment to a particular ministry, and then you suddenly see it all crumble and fall apart. They don't seem to stop being Christians. They just seem to have stopped allowing it to direct their life. The commitment to Jesus hasn't gone, but his way has. I'd love to just hear you kind of share your thoughts around commitment for a moment.
Yeah, I think commitment's one of those words that sounds pretty uninspiring, doesn't it, really? It's not like, oh, good, I'm committed. Excellent. Hooray. Yeah. But actually, I think really what James talks more about than commitment is perseverance, which is the outworking of commitment. And, he says, let perseverance, in the first chapters, let perseverance do its work in you so that you may become mature and complete. And the way we fulfill our commitments is by persevering and saying, actually, if I'm going to become mature, ripe and complete in this, this means like staying the course even when it's tough, which doesn't mean that we should always stay with a relationship even if it's abusive. It doesn't mean that we stay serving in a ministry for 45 years even though we hate it. It's not about false kind of commitment or about signing up to rotas forever. It's about choosing to follow Jesus and to listen to what he's saying and to be obedient about where he's taking us, but also to let our yes be yes, to follow through on what it is that he's asked us to do, because we're in a culture that screams at us the opposite, that really it is, I love that the fact that more people are watching Strictly Come Dancing than ever. The viewing figures are through the roof, but actually the participation in dance in this country is an all-time low. So we want to sit on our sofas, we want to eat our pizzas, and we want to critique others doing it. But actually, the commitment to find the exhilaration and the joy and everything that comes with doing it, actually, that's kind of subsiding. But the adventure comes when we commit to the process, not just to critiquing others, and to saying, Jesus, I want to go on this adventure of following you. And sometimes that will mean pushing through in a relationship when it gets tricky. It means pushing through onto the other side of a tunnel of chaos in a ministry, because I believe in it with all my heart, even though this person has disappointed me, even though I didn't get the funding I was hoping for. We've seen that time and time again in church and in buildings projects, in relationships, in ministries. There is always a tunnel of chaos, and it's the people who find the resilience in Jesus, who can find that treasure in their jar of clay and pull on that resource rather than just themselves, that make it to the other side, which is always like the most beautiful place to be.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who has been in something for years and years and years, and they've been committed and committed and committed because they know they ought to be, but they've not seen the breakthrough, or they've not seen the change, and actually they've just kind of ground to that, I'm doing this because I have to, and I know Jesus says my yes, so I said yes all those years ago, and it's just killing me. What would you say to somebody who's kind of in that treadmill place?
Well, I suppose the first thing I'd say to them is thank you. And I think that faithfulness is one of the things we don't talk about very much as a church. And there is something so beautiful about the people, and they are often the older ones in our church, who still turn up to every prayer meeting and who still turn up to everything faithfully. And I think God has a special place in his heart for the faithful. It's great to make a big impact, but actually those who faithfully follow, even when maybe they're not feeling all of that initial passion, those people who stay committed to relationships even though the love has faded, the people who stay committed to serving in the children's work because they know it's the right thing to do, that's really special. But I suppose the other thing I would just say to them is, how can you fan into flame that passion that is inside you if you feel that God hasn't called you away from that and that you're still in it? And for me, the answer has often been to surround myself with people who are maybe earlier on in the process. So it might be that they're newly married, or it might be that they're people who've just joined a team and who are like absolutely fizzing with ideas and resources and links and websites and, can't get enough of it. And actually part of me kind of like goes, oh my gosh. But actually, if I engage in that and embrace it and welcome that, and I'm teachable enough and humble enough to say, just because I've been round the block, I've got stuff to learn, then what happens is that their passion and my wisdom become like a really winning combination. So thank you for your faithfulness, but get others around you who are maybe, really fueled up and fired up, and let that rub off on you.
Yeah. I found myself a couple of years ago thanking people who... So there's one particular person at my church who barely turns up to anything. So when they did, I thanked them.
Right.
Or somebody who constantly kept signing up on the rota for things but never turning up. And when they did, I thanked them. There was one particular girl who will remain nameless, who turned up not just on time but early for everything. She's committed. And I actually thought, how often do I thank her? But I've got thanks for these people who are a blooming nightmare. So I ended up having these little cards made that just said on them, thank you. And I decided that every couple of weeks I'd sit at my desk and just think, who are the committed ones that I could just drop a postcard through their door just saying, I've seen and I've noticed and thank you. And what's been really interesting is how those people have just flourished even more in recent years. I often have to say to some of them, no, you don't need to do anymore. You do a lot, but actually they just want to because they know they're appreciated. So I've been learning, how do you appreciate and thank the ones who are faithful and not just the ones who are absolute nightmares. I have a church that's full of Facebook maybes. You say, we're going to do this, are you coming? And they say, maybe. What you mean is no, but you daren't say no, so you say maybe. But the Facebook maybe culture. I think if Jesus was around, he did his Sermon on the Mount, he would definitely talk about the Facebook maybe culture.
I do think there is someone said to me years ago who we asked to mentor us, a couple we asked to mentor, and they said to us, we're not going to chase you up. You've got to chase us up. And I thought, oh, how rude. I expect to be adored, But actually, what they were saying is followers choose to follow.
Yeah.
We're not going to chase you to go, are you following? Are you still following? Do you want to follow? If we want to follow, it's up to us as disciples to follow Jesus. And it's a wonderful thing when we can spot other people are following, not just turning up, but actually who are demonstrating Jesus. And we can see that they are, they're getting deeper in their walk with God and how they're sharing that with other people. I think if we can commend people, not just for what they do, but what we see of Jesus in them. And I love the fact you're so intentional about that. I know a couple of church leaders who have it literally in their diary because it wouldn't come naturally to them, just once a month, send 3 cards, and I think if we can, I've often given myself the unofficial job title, chief cheerleader. And I think if you can see people who are facing the right direction and making those wise choices and actually putting into practice what they know to be true, even if it's costly, that's worth commending because, that's precious actually. And we do spend a lot of time on people who are walking the other way. So you're brilliant, Chris. I love that example.
No, Cathy, thank you for your time. And, I really recommend this. I absolutely love it. A friend of mine had you speak at their church a little while ago in Liverpool, and they just said how incredible you were. And if anybody's watching and wants you to come and speak on Living on Purpose or Digging for Diamonds, how do they get hold of you?
Just go to my website, cathymadavan.com, and get in touch. It's just a privilege, actually, to speak in different places. A real honour. Yeah. Thank you.
You're so good at just blessing the church wherever you go. So, Cathy, just kind of want to honour you as you do that and Living on Purpose. I highly recommend this. I've bought some copies and they've gone on our church library already. And I think we've got your biggest fan in our church, and he's already taken 2 or 3 of those copies, so they've already gone. But Cathy, thank you for your time.
You too.
And I look forward to catching up soon. Bless you.
You too. See you, Chris.
Bye-bye.